The Galactic Council chamber was filled with golden light, but the air inside felt heavy and frozen, like time itself had stopped breathing. On the massive central screen, the transmission played without interruption. Billions across the galaxy had their eyes fixed on the same image. A human colony, peaceful and bright just days before, now burning under the red glow of bombardment. The enemy called themselves the Purifiers, a species that believed only their kind had the right to live. Their fleets hovered over the colony like vultures, raining fire without mercy, tearing through cities, homes, schools, hospitals. It wasn't war. It was extermination. It was genocide. And the Council, the so-called guardians of peace, watched without lifting a finger. Rows of alien delegates sat in silence, their faces tight with fear or indifference. No emergency fleet launched, no defenses raised, no protests made. The screens showed human families running through streets engulfed in flame, ships trying to evacuate shot down one by one, shields collapsing, bodies falling. The screams carried through every speaker in the chamber, echoing like a curse that wrapped around every throat in the room. Some delegates looked away, others stared blankly, but no one moved, no one acted. At the center of the chamber stood Earth's delegation. 3 humans, dressed in dark uniforms, their faces pale but their eyes unbroken. They had petitioned for help. They had begged for an emergency vote. They had warned the Council for months that the Purifiers were coming. And now they stood, forced to watch as their colony died in real time. The youngest among them, a woman with short black hair and clenched fists, whispered through her teeth, "They're doing nothing." The lead ambassador didn't answer. He couldn't. His jaw was locked so tight it ached, his knuckles white against the edge of the podium. The camera feed flickered as the Purifier ships moved lower, closer, firing again. The last human defense ship, a single patrol frigate, burned against the night sky. The colony's surface cracked under orbital fire. The screams turned to static. And then the screen went dark. Total silence filled the council chamber. No voice, no protest, just silence. It was worse than noise. It was the silence of an entire galaxy pretending not to hear. For years, Earth had stood among the stars as one of many. Humanity had believed in diplomacy, in alliances, in the Council's promise of protection. But as the last child's cry vanished into static, something inside humanity shattered. They had known betrayal before, but never like this, not on this scale, not this openly. And while the alien delegates sat frozen, Earth's delegation did not lower their eyes. They stared straight at the dead screen like soldiers memorizing the shape of a wound. The supreme speaker of the Council, a tall alien with shimmering scales and a voice polished by centuries of politics, finally broke the silence. "The Council expresses its deepest sorrow for this tragedy," it said, its tone practiced and empty. "But intervention was not within our jurisdiction. We must maintain balance between powers." Those words, those hollow, meaningless words, landed in the chamber like knives. The human ambassador turned slowly to face the speaker. His voice was quiet, too quiet. "Balance," he repeated. "That's what you call it." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Some alien representatives shifted in their seats. Others looked down. No one dared to speak, because they all knew what this was: not balance, not neutrality. It was cowardice. And worse, it was permission. Outside the chamber, news of the genocide spread like wildfire. Millions of human citizens watched from Earth and across the colonies, their faces lit by the same cold transmission. Fathers clenched their fists. Mothers wept silently. Soldiers who had once believed in the Council stared at the sky and swore they would never forgive. Something deep in the human heart, a fire that had been buried under diplomacy and restraint, began to burn again. Inside the chamber, the human ambassador stepped away from the podium. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply walked toward the exit, followed by his delegation. The sound of their boots against the polished floor echoed through the vast hall like a drumbeat, slow and steady, like something ancient waking up. The Supreme Speaker called out after them, "Earth must remain calm. We cannot afford rash action." But the humans didn't even turn around. The moment they stepped out of the chamber, everything changed. The air outside felt colder, sharper. The youngest delegate whispered, "They just watched them die." The ambassador's eyes were locked on the stars beyond the glass walls. "Yes," he said, "and now the galaxy is going to remember it." Across Earth's hidden networks, silent messages began to pulse. They weren't diplomatic cables. They weren't pleas for aid. They were signals, old codes, buried orders written decades ago for the day when Earth would have to stand alone. Military installations buried beneath ice and rock flickered to life. Defense satellites that hadn't moved in decades turned toward deep space. War factories that the Council believed dismantled began producing again, not for defense but for retribution. The Council didn't notice at first. They were too busy pretending everything was fine, holding meetings, releasing statements, patting themselves on the back for their restraint. But Earth was not meeting. Earth was preparing. On the other side of the galaxy, the purifiers celebrated. They broadcast their victory, boasting of the cleansing of humanity's outpost. Their fleets glittered like blades beneath the stars, their commanders drunk on the belief that no one would stop them. They were right about the Council, but they were wrong about humanity. In the shadows of Earth's orbit, massive hangars opened in silence. Old warships that hadn't seen light in 50 years began to stir, engines humming like sleeping beasts waking from hibernation. New ships, built in secret, slid out of their hidden docks. Special units disappeared from bases around the solar system without a word. No announcement, no warning. Humanity didn't need to shout. They only needed to move. In the Council's golden chamber, the alien delegates resumed their usual work the next day as if nothing had happened. They thought Earth would mourn quietly. They thought this would end like so many other tragedies in history, with silence. But far from their eyes, in the dark corners of space where the Council's power didn't reach, humanity was already building its answer. The day the galaxy watched genocide was the day Earth stopped watching. The day it stopped waiting for permission. The day something old, something dangerous, something human came awake again. And when it moved, the stars would never be the same. The galaxy thought humanity would grieve quietly, that it would cry into the dark and do nothing, just like so many others who had been abandoned by the Council before. They thought Earth would bow its head, hold memorials, and whisper about peace. They were wrong. The night the last signal from the colony died, Earth went silent. Not broken silent, but the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Governments stopped talking in public. Military channels went dark. Traffic between colonies slowed to a crawl. And to the outside world it looked like humanity was in mourning. But beneath that stillness, the machine had begun to move. Deep under the old mountains of Earth, where no alien sensor had ever been allowed, giant steel doors sealed for decades began to open, one after another, with a hiss that shook the ground. In the frozen north, buried under layers of ice, entire hangars came alive, lights flickering on across ships that had not been seen on any Council record in half a century. They were old, massive, and black, relics from the years when Earth had prepared for war it was never allowed to fight. The black fleets, warships so secret the Council thought they were decommissioned long ago, were not only real, they were waiting. One by one their reactors roared to life, their engines humming like sleeping beasts stretching after a long winter. On Mars, factories once used for trade and transport shut down without warning. The workers were not panicking. They were already trained. These weren't new orders. These were old codes, buried deep in Earth's defense systems, activated with a single signal sent the night the colony burned. Underground hangars opened and missile silos that hadn't moved in decades shifted their aim toward the void. On Luna, human intelligence networks began purging alien communications, locking their own channels tight. They cut themselves off deliberately. To the galaxy, it looked like Earth was retreating into itself. But those who knew what silence really meant knew better. Hidden research stations orbiting forgotten moons shut down their fake signals and revealed their real purpose, their energy output rising at an alarming rate, invisible to most sensors. Across the outer colonies, military garrisons that were supposed to be symbolic suddenly transformed overnight, soldiers leaving behind their light uniforms and stepping into full combat gear, their faces cold, their voices quiet. They were no longer a peacekeeping force. They were an army. Alien ambassadors stationed on Earth noticed the shift but couldn't understand it. They tried to contact their governments, but the lines were no longer open. Every diplomatic channel they used was shut down, not jammed, locked out with surgical precision. One ambassador whispered to another during an emergency dinner, "They are planning something." But even then, they didn't grasp the scale of what was coming. In the Solar Defense Command, the Admiralty met in an underground war room that hadn't been active since the early years of the Expansion Age. The main table displayed a glowing map of the galaxy, and red markers flashed along purifier space. No one spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. The faces around the table carried the same look, the look of people who had already made their decision. The fleet marshal finally broke the silence, his voice deep and steady. "They think this ends with tears. It ends with fire." The order wasn't shouted. It was whispered, and that whisper traveled faster than any council sensor could track. Commanders across the colonies received the same message in a single line of code, old and simple: Iron Sky Protocol. No one asked questions. They already knew what it meant. Entire crews were assembled overnight, pilots returning from leave, soldiers abandoning everything personal. They moved with quiet precision, because this wasn't the start of a war. It was the awakening of a plan that had been sleeping for years. In the asteroid belts beyond Neptune, silent shipyards hidden from galactic eyes began constructing in the dark, their robotic arms pulling massive plates of black armor into place. These weren't diplomatic vessels. These were war machines designed in secret, built to do one thing: end threats. One engineer, standing alone in the observation deck, whispered to himself as he watched the first dreadnought fully awaken. They wanted a monster. Now they'll meet it. Meanwhile, alien news networks speculated endlessly, their talking heads claiming humans were too fractured to respond. Some said they would appeal to the Council for more protection. Some said they'd fall into fear. None of them understood that Earth wasn't looking for protection anymore. It was preparing for something far worse. In the human military academies, cadets were woken in the middle of the night and marched into briefing halls, their commanding officers standing like stone pillars. No flowery speeches, no politics, just a simple message playing on the central screen. The footage of the colony being wiped out, the screaming, the silence, and then the words, "Never again." The recruits didn't cry. They didn't shout. They sat still, jaws clenched, fire burning in their eyes. Earth's silence spread like a storm front across its colonies. Every system began cutting ties with the Council's control grid. No more shared data, no more dependence on alien trade networks, no more listening to empty promises. To the outside galaxy, it looked like humanity was isolating itself in grief. But in reality, the storm had already started moving beneath the surface. The purifiers had slaughtered a colony. The Council had done nothing, and humanity had decided they would never wait again. In orbit above Earth, the first of the Black Fleet dreadnoughts broke through the atmosphere, rising slowly like a shadow stretching across the stars, its black armor swallowing the light around it. And down on the planet, the people didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Every human watching knew what this meant. The galaxy thought humanity was mourning. But humanity wasn't mourning. Humanity was getting ready. The first whispers began in the outer rim, carried not by official channels but by smugglers, traders, and shadow fleets that had always lived between the cracks of empires. It started with a convoy captain who swore he saw black ships moving through an uncharted corridor near the galactic fringe, massive and silent, without identification codes, without light, just drifting through the void like a fleet of ghosts. Others laughed at him, said it was space mirages or old pirate stories, but then another trader swore the same thing, and then another, and then the whispers started to crawl through every corner of the galaxy. The humans are moving. The Council ignored it at first. They always ignored whispers. But whispers are like smoke. They always come from somewhere. In Purifier territory, patrol fleets reported odd readings along their borders. A listening post picked up faint engine signatures that didn't match any known pattern. Another scout ship claimed to have been followed by something it couldn't see, only feel, something that made its hull sensors shake like static. The Purifier Admiralty dismissed the reports as fear. But fear isn't born from nothing. The scouts kept vanishing. Convoys disappeared into the dark with no distress signal, no debris, no trace. Only silence remained, the kind of silence that felt like something was breathing just out of sight. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, diplomats started receiving classified reports they didn't want to read. Border stations going offline. Traders refusing to travel through human-controlled sectors. Sensor drones being destroyed by unidentified objects. Some of the smarter alien strategists began to feel it in their bones. A storm was building, but they didn't know where, they didn't know how, and they had no way to stop it. Still, the council laughed it off publicly. They had convinced themselves Earth was still weak. They had no idea what Earth had been building in the shadows for decades. A young alien senator raised her voice during one session, saying, "Humans don't shout when they bleed. They build." But no one listened to her. They should have. Out on the edge of the void, where stars are cold and few, black fleets moved with the precision of a living organism. Human ships flew in formations that weren't like council fleets. They didn't light up, they didn't send signals, they didn't even break the silence of the void. They were shadows, wolves, predators who had memorized the scent of their prey. Inside those ships, thousands of soldiers sat in silence, their helmets resting on their knees, their eyes burning with a fire that didn't need speeches to keep it alive. Pilots moved through their routines like it was muscle memory. Engineers ran their hands over cold steel that hummed with power. There was no panic, no rush, just a patient, slow tightening of a noose the galaxy didn't know was around its neck yet. In the Purifier High Command, fear began to creep in around the edges of their arrogance. Whole patrol groups had gone silent. When they sent fleets to investigate, they found nothing. Not debris, not wreckage, not a single signal. Just cold stars and the echo of their own fear. "It's impossible," one of their generals said, slamming a clawed hand on the table. "No one can move like that." But someone was moving like that. Humanity. And they weren't alone. The whispers had reached the criminal networks, the mercenaries, the old warlords who lived off scraps of old wars. They said things like, "The humans are awake now. They're building something in the dark. They're coming." Most dismissed it as fearmongering, but the ones who had fought alongside humans in the old border wars didn't laugh. They remembered the way humans fought. They remembered how quiet they were before they struck. In the Council's intelligence center, a pattern started to emerge. Fleets disappearing. Patrols lost. Silent signals repeating across vast stretches of space. One analyst traced those signals and froze when he realized they formed a perfect ring around Purifier space. Humanity hadn't struck yet, but they had surrounded their enemy without firing a single shot. The analyst took the map to his superior, who looked at it and whispered, "They're hunting them." The Purifiers doubled their defenses, they increased patrols, built more turrets, fortified their stations, but it didn't matter, because fortifying against something you can't see is like fighting shadows with your hands. Human fleets moved in perfect silence, sliding through black corridors the Council didn't even know existed, through jump gates they had built decades ago and kept hidden. They had carved a network through the galaxy like veins of a beast no one knew was sleeping. One Purifier scout ship managed to record a glimpse before it vanished. The last image showed a massive black dreadnought passing slowly in front of its camera, blocking out the stars. The hull bore no markings, no numbers, no flags. Just cold, black metal stretching into the void. The crew didn't have time to scream. That recording reached the Council 3 days later. It played in silence, the delegates staring at the ghostly shape as it moved like a shadow with teeth. Some of them laughed nervously. Some didn't, because deep down, everyone knew what it meant. Humanity wasn't licking its wounds. It was waiting. It was surrounding. It was hunting. And as the whispers grew louder, something else spread through the galaxy. Not words, not propaganda, but fear. Real fear. The kind that settles into the bones. Because humanity wasn't coming with speeches and ultimatums. Humanity was moving in silence. And when the silence breaks, it never breaks gently. The night it began, the galaxy didn't hear an alarm, it didn't get a warning, It didn't even have time to understand, because when humanity finally moved, it moved like a blade cutting through soft flesh, quiet, clean, final. One moment the Purifier fleets were patrolling their borders with arrogant confidence, and the next their entire sensor network went black. Thousands of satellites blinking out in perfect synchronization. No explosions, no hacking alerts, just silence. A silence so sudden it felt like the stars themselves had been erased. Panic spread through their command networks like fire in dry grass. But by the time their officers shouted for status reports, the humans were already inside. From the outer rim of Purifier space, black warships emerged in coordinated waves, not broadcasting, not boasting. Their drives cold and silent until the last second, dreadnoughts gliding like shadows through the dark, destroyers weaving behind them like hunting hounds, fighter wings already deployed before the Purifiers even realized the battle had started. Orbital stations sent scrambled signals that never reached anyone, because their relays had been cut in the first strike. They were blind, they were alone, they were prey. The first human volley struck 3 stations at once, railguns ripping through steel like it was nothing, kinetic rods hitting so hard and so fast that the explosions came half a breath after the impacts, shockwaves rippling through the atmosphere of nearby worlds, entire fleets shredded before they ever formed a defense line. The Purifier Admiralty shouted over their comms, ordering emergency formations, screaming for coordinates, but all they got back was static because the humans had shut down their entire communication grid in less than 6 minutes. Council observers tried to make sense of the reports coming in. Broken transmissions from Purifier border sectors, brief flashes of fire, fragments of fleet signatures, but nothing was clear, nothing was solid, just ghostly images of ships too big, too fast, too quiet, appearing and vanishing like predators in the dark. Some council members tried to laugh it off as Purifier propaganda gone wrong. Others sat very still, because in their bones they knew exactly what was happening. Humanity had unleashed what it had been hiding for decades. The Purifier fleets finally launched counterattacks, throwing everything they had at the black shapes tearing through their borders. Their cruisers fired beam cannons into the void, filling space with light, but the humans didn't meet them head-on like the Council did. They didn't play by the rules. They struck from above, from below, from every shadow. Entire flotillas vanished into coordinated kill zones, their engines bursting before they could even turn. A Purifier commander shouted into the comms, "Where are they?" But no one answered. Meanwhile, deep inside human command, far from any battlefield, the Solar Defense Council watched through live tactical feeds as the map turned red sector by sector. The fleet marshal stood over the table, his face like carved stone, his voice calm as he gave the order, Phase 1, silence their sky. And across Purifier space, human ships executed that order with machine precision. Orbital arrays crumbled. Defense satellites burned. Radar towers vanished. The Purifiers no longer had a sky, they had darkness. Council military analysts huddled in emergency rooms, staring at incomplete data streams as one sector after another went dark. "No one moves that fast," one alien general whispered. But his voice shook because he didn't believe his own words. Someone else muttered, "They weren't building trade fleets. They were building for this." And they were right. For decades, humanity had smiled, played politics, signed treaties, but underneath the smile was a knife. Now the knife was in their hands. On the bridge of the human flagship Eclipse, the Admiral watched the battle unfold like a chessboard. Her hands clasped behind her back, eyes steady, unblinking. "Status," she said, and her officers answered like a single voice. "All targets in Quadrant 7 down. Quadrant 8 losing comms. Quadrant 9 breached." Her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a quiet acknowledgement of inevitability. "Good," she whispered. "Don't stop." On one Purifier world, a massive ground-to-orbit cannon charged to fire at the incoming fleet, but before it could complete its cycle, a kinetic rod from orbit tore through it like a spear through glass, turning the fortress beneath into fire and rubble. Civilians on the surface looked up at the night sky and saw something they had never seen before. Human ships blotting out the stars like a storm front, moving without sound, without hesitation. By the time the Purifiers realized what was happening, half their border defenses were gone. By the time they regrouped, The second human wave had already cut their reinforcements in half. By the time they tried to send for help, no one could hear them. In less than a single night, the Purifier outer ring collapsed. And in that silence, their empire began to crack. Back in the council chamber, diplomats argued, shouted, demanded to know how this could happen. But deep down, no one needed an explanation. Humanity had been quiet too long, patient too long, bleeding too long. And when humanity strikes, it doesn't whisper warnings. Cuts throats in the dark. And as the last Purifier defense fleet was swallowed into the void, the galaxy finally understood. Humanity wasn't coming to negotiate. It was coming to end this. The Purifier Empire had spent decades boasting about its power, their fleets stretching across the stars like a golden wall they believed no one could break. They crushed smaller worlds, burned colonies, wiped out voices they didn't like, convinced they were untouchable. But when the human fleet moved deeper into their space, their so-called wall turned out to be nothing more than glass. Every defense line they tried to build was already collapsing by the time there. Admirals opened their mouths to give orders. Entire sectors fell in hours, not days, because humanity didn't come to fight for territory. They came to destroy. The first real battle happened over the Purifier stronghold in Sector V-19, where their largest shipyard sat like a fortress, a massive station the size of a small moon, built to produce fleets faster than anyone else in the galaxy, a place the Purifiers believed was indestructible. At dawn cycle, the sky above it went black as thousands of human warships arrived in formation. They didn't announce themselves, they didn't demand surrender. They simply cut through the void like a storm breaking over still water. The Purifier fleet swarmed out of the station like hornets, hundreds of golden cruisers, carriers, and frigates surrounding the black human ships. The Purifier commander barked orders, his voice filled with rage. Fire everything! And they did. The entire sector lit up in a blinding storm of energy beams and plasma fire. A wave of destruction that would have crushed any normal fleet. But the human ships didn't break. Their black hulls drank the fire like smoke against iron. Their shields burned blue and steady. Then came the response. The first human volley hit like the fist of a god. Railgun slugs moved so fast the sensors barely registered them. One shot ripped through 5 cruisers, snapping their spines like twigs. Another shattered the outer ring of the shipyard, sending fiery fragments drifting into space. Missiles streaked across the darkness in perfect formation. Not random salvos but surgical strikes, hitting command decks, reactors, engines, everything that made those ships alive. In less than 8 minutes, the Purifier front line was gone, erased, and their second line was screaming into their comms as the human dreadnoughts advanced. On the ground, inside the shipyard command tower, Purifier officers ran in circles, their screens flashing red, their voices cracking with disbelief. How are they moving this fast? One shouted, "Why can't we track them?" Another screamed. But there was no answer, because the truth was too simple. They were fighting an enemy they had underestimated for too long. Above their heads, human fleets moved like a single mind. Fighter wings cut through enemy formations with precision drills, their black hulls gleaming cold as they danced between enemy fire, their guns tearing apart carriers like paper. The Council had seen humans as diplomats, as builders. The Purifiers now saw them for what they truly were, apex predators. As the shipyard burned, the human flagship Eclipse emerged from behind the second moon, its size dwarfing every ship in the Purifier fleet. Its main cannons charged silently, no sound, no warning, just growing blue light. The Purifier commander's voice broke as he shouted, "Shields up! All power to defense." But it didn't matter. One shot fired. A beam of kinetic fury slammed into the shipyard's heart, splitting it in two like dry wood. The explosion rolled through the station like a wave of fire, taking with it every ship docked, every soldier hiding, every dream the Purifiers had of ever feeling safe again. Across Purifier space, the same story repeated itself. Human fleets didn't conquer, they erased. Shipyards, communication hubs, defense towers, border stations, all gone. No long battles, no glorious duels, just precision and silence. The Purifiers tried to rally. They called for reinforcements, but there was no one left to answer. Their fleets were either dead or cut off, surrounded by black ships that appeared like ghosts and vanished before counterattacks could even launch. Meanwhile, back in the council chamber, panic spread like blood in water. Reports came from frightened spies and broken purifier transmissions. Entire fleets gone. Shipyards destroyed. They're not slowing down. Council delegates argued, some terrified, some trying to save face. But deep down they all felt the same cold truth crawling down their spine. They had watched humanity's colony die, and now they were watching humanity answer. Not with mercy, not with diplomacy, but with fire. On the battlefield, the Purifier home fleet made its last desperate stand in orbit of their capital world. Thousands of their ships formed up, a golden wall meant to stop the human advance. But when the humans arrived, they didn't meet them on equal ground. They came from every direction at once, their formations folding through hidden jump gates like black wings closing around prey. The Purifier Admiral, once so arrogant, now shouted orders that no longer mattered. His fleet broke in less than an hour. The capital planet's defense grid, once called the strongest in the galaxy, fell in 19 minutes. On the bridge of the eclipse, the Admiral stood at the center, hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes calm as her officers delivered reports with steady voices. Sector V-19 secured. Enemy command destroyed. Their network is collapsing. There was no cheer, no roar of victory, only the steady hum of a machine doing what it was built to do. Humanity had spent decades being ignored, underestimated, betrayed. Now they moved with the cold patience of people who no longer believed in peace. The Purifier capital burned beneath the Black Fleet, its cities drowning in their own arrogance. And somewhere in that smoke and fire, every alien race that had once laughed at humanity learned the same lesson. Earth didn't bark before it bit. It watched. It remembered. And when it struck, it didn't leave survivors. The Purifier Empire was collapsing like a dying star, folding in on itself sector by sector, system by system. Its great fleets reduced to fragments drifting in silence, its proud commanders hiding behind broken comms, its cities burning beneath black skies. They had thought their strength was enough to keep the galaxy afraid, but they had never faced a war like this, not the kind that came screaming, but the kind that came in silence, precise, ruthless, and unstoppable. Every border they tried to defend had already fallen by the time their fleets arrived. Every ship they sent out was intercepted before it ever reached its target, and every order they gave ended in static. Humanity wasn't fighting them. It was dismantling them piece by piece, like a hunter pulling bones from a carcass. In the capital war room of the Purifier Empire, their highest commanders sat around a flickering holographic map, the once proud blue lines of their empire replaced with glowing red marks, every one of them a system lost to human hands. The Supreme Marshal slammed his fist against the table, his voice raw. "We are the Purifiers. We were meant to rule this galaxy." But his voice was trembling, his eyes bloodshot, because even he could no longer pretend to believe it. "We still have fleets," another said weakly. "We can regroup at the core." But they all knew the truth. Every fleet that tried to regroup had vanished. No distress calls. No survivors. No answers. In orbit above their dying empire, the black hulls of human dreadnoughts prowled like predators, their formation tight, controlled, their weapons always ready. They didn't waste shots. They didn't speak. They didn't play with their prey. They simply advanced, burning everything in their path with a cold, deliberate precision that no Purifier fleet could counter. It wasn't a war anymore. It was a storm, a quiet, endless storm. The council watched from afar with growing horror, emergency meetings stacking on top of each other, delegates shouting over broken transmissions, reports screaming through encrypted channels. They've breached the inner rim. The Purifier fleets are down to 30%. Their capital is surrounded. We can't contact their outer defenses. But the most chilling report of all was the simplest one. The humans aren't slowing down. Inside human command, there was no chaos, no shouting, no confusion, only calm, cold efficiency. The Solar Defense Council sat in their war room, their holographic map blooming red as Purifier systems fell like dominoes. Sector N-12 secured, an officer reported. No resistance remains. Proceed, the fleet marshal said softly. His voice didn't need to be loud. Everyone in that room already knew the plan. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about finishing what had been started. Across the Purifier core, alien soldiers fought desperately, but their desperation didn't matter. Human strike teams landed like ghosts, fast and silent, cutting through defensive lines like blades through paper. They didn't waste words. They didn't leave warnings. They hit command towers, shield generators, orbital guns, every key node that kept the Purifier war machine alive. In one night, 3 major fortress worlds fell without a single prolonged battle. The Purifier generals were left with nothing but panicked messages and broken fleets. On the battlefield above Lornis, one of the Purifier's last strongholds, their final defensive armada waited, a desperate collection of thousands of ships pulled together from what was left of their empire. The admiral of that fleet stared into the black, his claws shaking around the edge of the command table, his voice low. "They'll come soon," he said to no one in particular, and right on cue, the stars blinked out. The human fleet emerged like a wall of darkness, their hulls reflecting no light, their engines whispering through the void, their formation so perfect it looked like one living thing. The Purifier admiral tried to rally his forces. "Fire everything!" he screamed, and his ships obeyed, thousands of golden beams and missiles streaking across space in a blinding wall of light. But the human formation didn't scatter. It didn't break. It absorbed the storm and answered in silence. The first human volley slammed into the Purifier lines like a hammer through glass. Their front ranks folded immediately, cruisers ripped apart, carriers split down the middle. In less than 7 minutes, the battle turned into a slaughter. Purifier ships tried to retreat, but the human fleet had already surrounded them. Escape was a fantasy. One by one, they were erased. Back on the Purifier homeworld, the Supreme Marshal received the final transmission from his fleet. A burst of static, a scream, then silence. He dropped to his knees, not because he was noble or brave, but because he finally understood what they had awakened. They hadn't fought humans. They had poked a sleeping god. And now that god had decided to end their empire. In the council chamber, fear spread like wildfire. The same delegates who had ignored the colony's screams now whispered nervously to each other. "They'll stop after the Purifiers, right?" one alien asked, but no one answered, because deep down they all knew humanity had stopped being civilized the moment they were forced to watch their people die. And what they had unleashed now wasn't a nation. It was vengeance dressed in steel and silence. On the flagship Eclipse, the admiral stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the map. "The core is next," an officer said. She gave a single nod. No emotion, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty of a storm that has already decided where it will fall. Around her, the fleet turned, engines flaring to life like the heartbeat of something unstoppable. The Purifiers had taken a colony and slaughtered innocents, thinking no one would come. Now their empire was ash. Their fleets were gone. Their power nothing but a story already fading into the black. And as humanity's ships moved toward the core, the galaxy trembled. Not because it was next, but because it had seen what happens when Earth stops being civilized. When humanity answers, it does not whisper. It burns. The Purifier Empire no longer had a sky, no longer had borders, no longer had an army that could even pretend to stand against what had been unleashed. The black fleets of humanity moved through their core like a storm without thunder, leaving nothing behind but silence and ash. The once mighty empire that had laughed at human suffering now sat in ruins, its commanders scattered, its citizens trembling under the shadow of ships that swallowed stars. In the center of their capital, where golden towers once reached proudly into the heavens, fire rained down from above. The sky was no longer golden. It was black, heavy, alive with the rumble of engines that carried no mercy. The council watched from afar, the same council that had ignored the colony's screams, sitting now in their great chamber as report after report came in, and not a single delegate could deny the truth anymore. "They've breached the core," one whispered. "The Purifier command is gone," another muttered. But it wasn't just fear in their voices. It was something deeper, something colder. They were realizing too late that the humans they had underestimated for so long had never needed permission to act. They had waited only to make sure that when they struck, nothing could stop them. On the surface of the Purifier homeworld, their armies tried to rally one last time. Thousands of golden soldiers lined the streets with heavy weapons, armored vehicles rolled into position, massive artillery batteries pointed at the sky, but when the human fleet descended, it wasn't like an army arriving. It was like a shadow falling across the world. Drop pods rained down like steel comets, striking the ground with bone-shaking force. Black armored soldiers emerged like smoke, moving with a precision that didn't belong to desperate fighters. It belonged to predators who already knew they had one. The Purifier soldiers fired everything they had. Explosions lit up the city. Artillery screamed. Buildings crumbled under their own panic. But the human soldiers advanced without breaking formation. Their armor absorbed fire. Their drones flew overhead, mapping every alley, every defense point, every heartbeat. There were no speeches, no demands, no mercy. The Purifier front line cracked like glass under the weight of something too relentless to resist. Within hours, their capital became a graveyard of gold and ash. Above the planet, in the command bridge of the Eclipse, the human admiral stood surrounded by cold blue screens showing every battlefield, every movement, every broken enemy formation. Officers reported without emotion. Resistance minimal. Sector 8 cleared. The central palace is secure. She nodded once. Then end it, she said softly, and that soft order traveled like a storm down through every unit. The last stronghold was the Purifier Council Hall, a massive golden spire at the heart of their capital, where their leaders had once ordered the massacre of human lives with cold smiles. Now that same hall shook as human forces surrounded it from all sides. Inside, the Supreme Marshal and his generals huddled around a table, their hands shaking, their faces pale. "They can't do this," one of them whispered like a child clinging to a bedtime story. "We were the strongest," another muttered, almost laughing. But they weren't the strongest anymore. They were already finished. The doors of the spire cracked open like dry wood under the weight of human charges. Black armored soldiers marched in, step by step, their boots echoing through the hall where Purifier voices once boasted of genocide. The Supreme Marshal fell to his knees when he saw the human commander step forward, her helmet reflecting the burning city outside. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The Marshal stammered, "We were unstoppable." His voice broke as he looked up at her. She simply stared back, her silence heavier than any speech. The world outside the spire burned. The last Purifier fleet that had tried to escape was already gone, erased by orbital bombardment so precise it looked like the hand of a god had swept through space. Within 24 hours, an empire that had stood for centuries ceased to exist. In the Galactic Council chamber, the silence was different now. It wasn't the cold silence of apathy. It was the shaking silence of fear. Delegates whispered among themselves, "Will they stop? Will they turn on us? What have we allowed to grow?" But they didn't understand this was never about them. This was about a promise humanity made the night it watched its children die. A promise that if the galaxy would not act, humanity would. And humanity did. The eclipse hung above the Purifier homeworld like a blade over a throat. The Admiral stood at the viewport, watching the flames, not smiling, not celebrating, because this wasn't victory. This was judgment. She whispered to no one in particular, "They thought we would beg. They thought we would cry. They forgot who we are." And below her, millions of tons of metal and fire drifted like a silent warning to the galaxy. When Earth finally spoke, it wasn't in words. It was in the language the galaxy had forced it to learn, the language of war. And that language echoed across the stars, louder than any scream, sharper than any blade. A message written in the ashes of the Purifier Empire. You watched. We did not. The galaxy would never forget that night. The night when humanity stopped being the quiet race. The night when shadows turned into warships. The night when the hunters became the hunted. The night when the silent storm broke, and nothing in the stars was the same again.